All right, it's time to get started today. We have a great lineup for you. Thanks for joining, everyone. This is webinar number 16 in a series of webinars for small business, navigating the impacts of COVID-19. I'm Barbara Coffey, Director of Economic Initiatives for the City of Tucson. And we have a great panel. Our speakers represent 3 different nonprofit organizations, and we'll hear how they have been adapting as a result of this pandemic. As always, we'll take your questions as we go, so feel free to enter those in the chat box or the Q&A section, and we'll get to as many of those as possible in our time together this afternoon. And we will ask all participants to stay muted since we have a large number of attendees, but we will record the session and make it available for everyone tomorrow. You can find links to all our previous webinars at connecttucson.com, and typically we have those posted by noon the next day, so you'll find a link to it there. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to introduce our first guest speaker, Michael McDonald, CEO of the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. A third-generation Southern Arizonan, Michael's held leadership roles in affordable housing and environmental nonprofits, as well as a for-profit startup manufacturing firm. He also happens to be a gardener and a piano player. Maybe we'll find out which he's better at. I know I could use a little help on my heat-weary plants right now, for sure. But this conversation is more about the weariness that we're experiencing with COVID-19. So Michael, if you would start us off and tell us how the Community Food Bank is dealing with this pandemic and its impacts. Michael?
Thank you, Barbara. Good to be with everyone today. I would say there are days we're dealing with it quite effectively, and other days that are low moments where we just feel fatigue, the end of our bandwidth, and just burnt out sometimes. I would say that what helps for nonprofits is to know that the community is with us. And so when we have volunteers and people who donate and people who just show up and say, can we feed you guys lunch because you're feeding the community, I think whatever those small ways of just showing kindness helps all of our spirits, everyone's spirit in this town and in this community and across the world right now, is the little kindnesses really help. So Tucson is special for the little kindnesses, so keep doing that. And I know we all have low moments, and I have weepy moments. I'm not sure why I weep sometimes, but I find myself more emotional than ever. I think it's the reality of how precious life is and how fragile we all are. And also in the midst of that fragility and preciousness, how strong we can still be when we're together, for each other, with each other. And that's what I'm seeing happen with our staff, with our partner agencies, with our elected officials and our government partners. People are turning out and saying, how can we help? We have funders who have called us and say, hey, we don't want to put any more restrictions or any more burdens on you. What could we do to ease your burden from a financial standpoint? If we just gave you a restricted grant, can we release the restriction and you use it where most needed? When we talk to City of Tucson officials, what can we do to help? When we talk to Pima County, hey, we have some extra workers. Could we loan them to you for a while? All of that is super helpful. We've had folks donate facilities so that we can store a lot of food product. People keep using the website to make donations, and all of our work is done, the work that used to be inside is done outside now. And so there's extreme heat, and that's where some of the fatigue comes into play. So we really have to buy a lot of protective equipment to keep people safe, not only from the coronavirus, but from the elements, from the heat. And then we have many folks in the Community Food Bank, our gardeners and farming team, who work outdoors anyway, except now they're working with program participants, community members, clients, and you gotta have more protective equipment on, and it's hot. So we have to worry about people's safety. So I think, some of the things that we've learned through the pandemic is that people care. We're here to help each other. People show up. People go all in, and we need that no matter whether it's healthcare or frontline essential work like food security, or as we emerge from the pandemic into schools, how do we do that so teachers and students and everyone is safe? I think the creativity and the innovation is what has struck me. and the ability to be agile. So I see all of us figuring out new ways of doing things. And what we thought would take forever to do in a pre-pandemic status quo culture suddenly changes. And it's like, oh, we've innovated and we've implemented it easily. We've experimented, we've prototyped something, and we figured out how to make something better. So we've been doing a lot of that experimentation, prototyping, changing processes. Things that were rules yesterday are no longer important today. So we've given ourselves permission to be more innovative and risk-taking. And that's an important time for all of us right now.
So what are some examples of that? Some things that you've had to change and adapt with this pandemic?
Well, you know, for the food bank, with food security, we've seen demand or community need more than double pre-pandemic levels. So to distribute food safely outside and keep everyone safe, we had to figure out how to do large distributions of food assistance, where you have 1,000 households show up in a 3.5-hour period of time. We've never had to do that before. So that just takes a lot more people. It takes working out the logistics of something like that. So very much like a manufacturing facility, figuring out who needs to do what, where, and make it very efficient and agile and adaptive. And to maximize or optimize the throughput, it's just very much like a manufacturing line. We don't always have to think like a manufacturing company, but we have become that through that distribution. Another example would be, we have a lot of seniors and other folks homebound, and rightfully so. We more than quadrupled the amount of prepared meals that we make out of our commercial kitchen. We had to change the menu quickly, so our chefs had to adapt. So it's about being creative with the resources that you have, the new partners that are emerging, and the new needs and opportunities. So it's bringing a lot more people who've never worked together into the same space to be able to do that work.
So you talked about the volume of activity. Has it increased or has it stayed the same? Are the clients different? What would you say about the population that you're serving right now?
Yes, pre-pandemic, food security or poverty is still very high in Southern Arizona. It's lack of sufficient income, lack of sufficient number of jobs that have thriving wages. And so it was a big number before, about 200,000 people we saw every year. But it doubled immediately, and 4 times the number of people who'd never used a food bank were showing up. It's people who got furloughed, people who had income reductions, or people who got laid off. It has started to stabilize a bit. We do worry if the federal unemployment benefits go away that it will spike back up again. And we do see periodic spikes every few weeks in it, maybe another group of people laid off, that we see small spikes. But we're still probably seeing 50% more people than we ever did before this time last year. Wow. So yes, volume matters right now. Being innovative about your partnerships and who has something to offer. So Pima County offered the Keno Sports Stadium, which is right now just a big empty stadium and a parking lot. And it's an asset that can be used for the community. So getting creative about your assets and how can you make a difference today with that idle asset.
So how would you say the pandemic has impacted your donor activity? Is fundraising a challenge for you, or do you find support comes easier in a time of crisis?
I think for basic human needs, human rights kinds of issues like food, whether it's the Great Recession or the pandemic, people understand that people need food and shouldn't go hungry. So that does help with donor awareness. Sustaining that over a pandemic is going to be the challenge because this is not going away anytime soon. We will not have full employment, and we will not have people's wages back to what they were anytime soon. So I worry about 6 months from now or 12 months from now. What we've really tried to do is strengthen our sources of food, and whatever we were good at yesterday, make that better today and start new things. We've exposed weaknesses in our work, and we're trying to address those. Thankfully, we had built up a pretty good cash reserve. So I think, you know, going into an economic slump, it's good. The business practices you had yesterday start to reveal themselves even more during an economic slump. I think we're good with a bit of a cash reserve, but I worry about 6 months from now, 12 months from now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. And if you had to say lessons learned coming into this pandemic and now still moving through it, because I don't see the end yet. We're all still sitting at home and on Zoom meetings, but what have you learned? What have been some of your maybe 2 or 3 biggest takeaways so far?
I think one is to reinforce that we do have a generous, caring community, and that matters now more than ever. So count our blessings because they're each other. We are each other's blessings. That's been reiterated. I think the ability to experiment, try something, and fail fast, which is sort of that lean design thinking, fail fast because you learn from that failure. And the next day you got to get up and do it all over again. So the ability to learn quickly and adapt, that is something that we have, that's been an achievement of ours. It's exhausting, but we're learning it and we get better every day. I think the last thing is, while scenario planning, we've done it before, I think now we're saying, look, we're in the midst of dealing with day-to-day crises today, but we now have a small team that is looking 6 months, 12 months, 24 months out from now. That team includes some staff members and some board members, because we need to be thinking beyond today's crisis, the horizon. Mm-hmm. What next? What's going to matter? What are we hearing from the community? What is needed? And how are we going to adapt to that 6 months, 12 months from now?
That's great. And for nonprofit organizations, I have to ask, how did technology play into your ability to navigate the pandemic? Were you ready for that, or did you have to adapt quickly in that arena as well?
I think nonprofits often fall behind from a technology or infrastructure standpoint. We've done pretty well. And so, yeah, we've been online. We've been increasingly over the last couple of years anyway, putting a lot of our education videos on our YouTube channel. So cooking demonstrations, nutrition classes, gardening classes, and we've just increased that tremendously, because if we can't interact with our education and workforce development clients and our cooking advocates out there, we can do it online. So I think everything that we had done before in small ways, we've amplified in bigger ways now.
That's awesome. And I know that's true for our city government. So we're testament to that as well. Look at us all online now. But you said one thing I want to touch on before we move on, the culinary programs, the job training programs. You know, how is it for your clients now? Are you still first able to provide those trainings? And then are you seeing some opportunities for them given everything that's going on?
Yes, the food bank is known for providing emergency food assistance, and that's what everyone's saying now. But we have had a 20-year commitment to root cause work, which is why are people in food insecure? It's because of jobs, lack of sufficient income. It's because of lack of political voice in our democracy. So increasing economic power, increasing political power. We have groups of staff and volunteers working in that all the time. We did take a pause from our culinary arts training workforce development program just because we had to quadruple the output and we were in between classes of new students. So we are now talking about what does it look like 3, 6 months, 12 months from now to have a full-blown workforce development, perhaps prison reentry partnership program with others. Because if we're committed to food justice, economic justice, racial justice, and the linkages of all of that, we have to be prepared to go all in on the justice side of our work, not just the charity side of our work.
That's fantastic. No, I appreciate that. Thank you for that perspective. And we're going to keep rolling, and then we're going to come back. I want to remind everyone to think of their questions. Go ahead and put those in the chat box as well, so that we can get to those. But we'll keep moving, and then we'll come back for group questions as well at the end. So next up, Bonnie Schock, Executive Director of the Fox Tucson Theater. This is a great story. Bonnie started her new role at the Fox on March 9th this year, right at the onset of this pandemic. And she's still here. She was lastly in Red Wing, Minnesota, where she was executive director of the Sheldon Theater of Performing Arts since 2015. She has multiple fellowships, holds Bachelor of Arts, Master of Fine Arts, mini MBAs for 3 decades of experience in the theater, arts, and entertainment industry. So Bonnie, welcome, and welcome to Tucson, since many of us haven't met you yet. So I'm glad you're here. And, you know, I've been reading the Fox Theater emails because I get those as a patron, and I'm just curious to hear what it's been like for you. So.
Thank you for having me here, and hello everyone. What a privilege to get to meet you and to hear Michael's story. The Fox obviously is a very different type of nonprofit organization. We operate in a different sphere, and though of course I believe they're all very much interconnected in terms of how we build a healthy community. And so, but in many ways, the Fox and the arts in general are looked at in the world as non-essential. And indeed, in this particular scenario, when the Fox was actually the first organization in town to announce that we would suspend programming, when we made that decision on March 12th, 3 days after I started my tenure. And we probably will ultimately be one of the last organizations to be in a position to restart what has been our regular programming model, simply because of the reality of the physical space that we inhabit and the numbers of people that we're in the business of gathering together, right? That's part of what we do, is we gather people together in shared experience, and that's what makes it so special. So this situation impacts all of those givens about the type of work that we do very profoundly. We have just recently sort of moved into a different phase of our response to this. Initially, you know, most people in the live performing arts industry and in the world in general thought that this would be a brief pause, right? We would suspend operations for a very brief period of time. We would pivot. That's a word we all like to think about right now and talk about and do. We would pivot. We would do some other things for just a short period of time. That the reality of the long period of time that we're now facing has set in for the entire industry of the performing arts in particular. And as that has happened over the last couple of weeks, the Fox has been responsive to that situation, and we've made some longer term decisions that simply needed to be made. So we've really gone through a couple of phases. We went through an initial phase of what we feel like was community responsiveness, was a responsible action to suspend what we were doing and look out for the health and safety of the community in a different way than we typically would, where typically we're looking out for health and safety by bringing people together and doing what we do well to celebrate our shared humanity. So we needed to cut that off, and that initial phase was just a hold. Then we moved into a phase of looking at a variety of online programming. We offered a number of different online programs, virtual concerts, small series. Our education program continued to be offering things remotely, especially for kids out of school and families that were trying to deal with that. Those things have continued actually up through last week. And then we now are in this phase where we realize that there's an extended period of dormancy that needs to occur. And that, you know, really major institutions all across the country have been announcing this, and the Fox has as well, that will be closed at least through the end of the calendar year. And then our plans are, we really have moved into what really is an organizational, I hate to use the word survival mode, but it is, and it's intentional. And so I don't mean that as a negative. I mean that as we need to look out for preserving the core assets that are the Fox and are the things that people care about. This space that is able to generate and gather people into shared experience to create new memories, special feelings about the community, all these different things that the Fox is able to do. We need to move into that phase of preserving that core. So those really hard decisions have been the last couple of weeks that the board and I have gone through that process, so that we map out a way that we can come back. Am I answering your question, Barbara?
This is great. And when you think about some of the programs that you brought online when you had to pivot, how was engagement, and what surprised you about maybe the level of engagement that you were getting from patrons? Were they accessing the programs? Were they showing up and viewing those opportunities? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely people were. Most of the delivery happened through social media and through these sort of quick responsive platforms like Michael was talking about, the sort of you put it out there quickly. And honestly, this isn't an area of our greatest expertise. Right, our greatest expertise is in that live experiences and in how we bring a sort of high quality to the moment that people enter into that space. And so those different platforms had a learning curve for us as presenters, and also for our audiences about how they would access us. And so yes, they were received very well. There was a lot of enthusiasm and lots of great comments, and generally people showing support for those things, and particularly with our education programs, where we built a wide range of community partnerships. For the biggest thing we did in our education program was our summer literacy event moved online in partnership with a range of different Tucson organizations. So we were accessing many different organizations, constituency bases and mailing lists and all those things. So that was particularly successful, that kind of notion of partnership, right? And how we bring people together across different organizations. So yes, people were, I will say that that dwindled, right? So that initial impulse to stay with us in that space, in that first 6 to 8 weeks of this new operating reality was there, and then it dwindled, and we made the decision actually to pull back on at least on the online concert offerings. So that's now we find ourselves in the space of looking at really a very intentional dormancy, so that we can be certain that in 2021, the Fox has the capital, the assets, and the operational ability to spring back as quickly as possible.
So just as a follow-up on that programming that you offered, I mean, just kind of like I asked Michael about some lessons learned, because I'm sure there are organizations that are attending today. What advice do you have? What did you learn? What worked and what didn't work when you tried out those things? And do you still see them being part of some of your offerings as you go forward?
Yeah, this is such a complicated question, Barbara. It raises all kinds of sort of visceral reactions for me personally. And because different from many other organizations, the live performing arts is live. It is designed, the medium itself is different when you record it, when you put it onto a screen. The entire experience is different, and it's a different art form. There's filmmaking, right, like I've been working in interdisciplinary arts practice throughout my career. So the medium itself shifts, and it changes the experience, it changes the purpose, it changes the function. And so when we think about how we as a live performing arts organization, if that is truly core to who and what we are, which I think it is, I think it's a huge part of what people care about this beautiful building that facilitates a different kind of encounter, then we need to be attentive to that. And so we've been working in that ambiguity, like really intentionally, like asking those questions of ourselves as artists and as arts workers about what does that mean to change a platform when an organization is fundamentally unable to operate its core identity.
Yeah.
And so the lesson learned, I think, is transparency and honesty with yourself. It's like asking those hard questions, and rather than simply following the whatever the trend is, right? Because people quickly went to that trend. Even if you do ultimately do that thing, to really be conscious of asking those questions about how does this fit with who we are, what we stand for, what we mean to the community, what the community wants from us. All of those things need to be actively thought about, talked about, planned for, and questioned. Because we tend to, it's easy to sort of just follow the path. So I think that's the big lesson.
I love that perspective. And I had to say, I wanted to ask because I was on when Arizona Theater put Georgia McBride on, and I watched Hamilton recently, and I've thought, you know, this is sort of unprecedented. We're watching these, and I have to tell you, I was surprised that my experience as a viewer was still emotional, and it was still connected. It was different because, as you mentioned, the physical aspects, the audience aspect of being part of that was not, you know, not present, and just the act of being out there, you know, being there in person. But I wondered if the engagement had something to offer the nonprofits, right? Does it bring more people to the theater? Does it expose people who might not have been exposed before? What do you think?
I absolutely think so. I think that ultimately it's part of the mix. It's part of the world we were in before COVID, and it's certainly going to be more part of the world we live in post-COVID, or inside of COVID as we are now. So I think it has to be a part of the mix. And I think, again, that's a matter of sort of transparency and honesty about where we are, what's happening around us, so that we can be as responsive as possible. You know, right now we're looking at a range of different, depending on how long this continues, you know, we're already working with our artist partners about different ways we could think about revised programming structures that might last another year or could, right? So there's lots of different ways that it can be thought about. But ultimately, I think it really is about being conscious of it. And the other thing that's important, I think, for us to be transparent about in our industry, and for audiences to understand about that kind of content, is something like Hamilton, for example, that event, that was pre-recorded years ago, right? A year and a half ago, with that original cast, with a whole different set of human beings, talent, artists operating in confined space in a way they wouldn't be able to work now, right? Yeah. So the fact that that content was already created is important to its ability to be distributed right now in the current environment. So the how we communicate about the producing realities of the work that gets made, and the health and safety conditions for the artists and the workers who are making and creating that kind of content, I think is also important for us to be transparent about in how we represent what it is we do.
That's great. So there's a question from Michael for the Fox. Did you apply for the PPP loan? And so I guess maybe some experience of that. And then are there special arts or grants loans that the Fox has also been able to tap into?
Yeah, so we did apply for the PPP loan, and we did receive it, and we utilized it, and ran out in 8 weeks. So that whole process of that idea of this being short term, right, was longer than that period of time could accommodate. So yes, we accessed that. We also have had some support. We've had incredible support from our existing donor base, as Michael mentioned, really heartwarming support. And we launched a Fox Forward Look to the Future campaign and invited the community to participate. And so far, people are participating well, and we invite people to consider that based on their own circumstances. And we also proactively look to secure a line of credit that actually our board is utilizing and thinking of as essentially a restartup fund
Mhm.
So the performing arts typically operates sometimes, well, it always operates on a razor thin profit margin. It's very difficult business, let's just say, to make profit. And so with all earned revenues shut off, typically the performing arts will operate utilizing advanced ticket sales as sort of the operating capital for the next projects that are coming up.
Mhm.
That supply line, right, that revenue stream, that cash flow is gone. In order for us to be able to restart the Fox and recapitalize the Fox most effectively, we knew we needed to secure a significant line of credit that we are preserving. And so that strategy right now is actually why you're seeing the Fox pull back dramatically now, in order to preserve that as our restart up capital.
Mhm.
It's an important strategy. I think it's very wise of the board to do it. The other piece that's important financially for folks to know is because we typically operate with that advanced ticket sales as your cash flow, we call that in the industry ticket liability. So for all the collected revenue on events that we haven't held yet, all those events just got canceled.
Mhm.
Every one of them. So we owe that money back to our patrons. And right now, as many performing arts organizations are going through, that process of refunding is going on, as well as many are being very generous and donating those tickets back, right? Not asking us for those funds back. But we're witnessing, like at our box office level, we're witnessing many of the things Michael is talking about in terms of our individual patrons losing their jobs, feeling the economic insecurity, like they need that $300 back, right? And so even though our policy typically, and across all the live performing arts industry, the policy is tickets are non-refundable, right? But this is an instance where the human reality, you need to be sensitive to what's happening to people. And so that process of not only losing revenue, ongoing earned revenue, but needing to refund back months and months worth of activity,
Right.
puts the performing arts in a particularly challenging situation.
So on that note, what else can consumers of the arts and the live arts, what can we do to support these live venues during this time? What else can we be doing?
Yeah, I think advocate. I think that being conscious of what these particular industry-specific challenges are. Right now, the Americans for the Arts is estimating that 85% of artists and arts workers in the United States are at least partially unemployed, and that 68% are fully unemployed. That is a devastating impact on a many-billion-dollar industry in our nation. And so the advocacy component, I think, for people to be conscious of the arts, not only as something that improves our quality of life, but also is a major industry, employing many, many, many people who are not employed anymore, is important.
So a couple questions here. One from Patricia. Did the video concert outreach bring back any revenue?
Well, not in a significant way. We split the revenue with the artists, and it essentially managed a bit of revenue for those artists to give them a gig, and a little bit of money to compensate our team for the time that went into it. But no, not in the kind of scale that an operation like the Fox would typically be utilizing.
And this question, is advanced booking happening with your shows, and how far out? So how are you, I guess, looking at the future?
Somebody out there gets how this industry works. It's very much on hold. The live performing arts field has sort of put a kind of a stop on things, as many artists are just simply waiting to determine if they can tour, how they can tour, can they actually put those people on a bus? If so, when will that be? They have to move from hotel to hotel across different areas of the country, which have different infection rates. So the complexity of it is significant. There is a good deal of activity that's happening on the 21-22 season, which would be fall 21 and on. So that's where people are having more confidence of putting dates on the calendar. But most of the events that happened that were postponed from the March through, summertime now, still those things that have been canceled or postponed are now rebooking. Initially they were rebooking into September. Now they're all rebooking out like a full year into the fall of 21. That's the most common timeline that's giving people a little bit of comfort. There's some areas of the country that are moving up earlier, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about what can even happen in the first quarter of 21.
And just to wrap this up, because I know the flip side of it is that if you think about the Fox downtown and the adjacent restaurants and other activity that depend on sort of, you codepend, right, on each other, all of that. I guess it begs the question, if things are starting to improve, or when they improve, or if we get used to masking up and keeping on with good behavior, and we get back to some of the live entertainment options, maybe, how quickly how easily will it be for you to bring back, programming at the live venue?
Well, I mean, we're at the ready.
Yeah.
I mean, I could share my screen and show you all our plans and all our, charts, et cetera, of what would need to happen depending on different, health scenarios, right? So we've done that work, but it will take us, the plan that we've recently adopted is that from our go time, like when we decide it's okay to start going again, to showtime is going to take 3 months. And that 3 months, if you think about it as an organizational startup, right? Anytime you begin a business, you need to get the product supply line in place. You need to market it. You need to staff up. You need to retrain that staff. You need to, right? All these pieces that go in. It's going to take about 3 months to get us rolling. And that's why we knew we wouldn't be able to open any sooner than next January. So we hope that those go signs are there by the mid-fall, so that we can get that all ready to go by as early in 21 as is reasonable.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Bonnie.
Let's
move and we'll shift gears once again. And now Betty Stauffer, Executive Director of Literacy Connects. She has been there since it was formed in July 2011. Under her leadership, the organization serves more than 46,000 people annually in Tucson and Southern Arizona. Before that, she was Executive Director of Literacy Volunteers of Tucson, that since June 2002. Before her move to Tucson in 2000, Betty was in Cleveland, Ohio, where she was the Executive Director of a transitional housing program for homeless families for about 10 years. So with that, welcome, Betty, and let's hear what's been happening in your world.
Well, just a real quick overview of Literacy Connects for those who don't know us. We have literacy programming literally for people of all ages. So from 6 months of age all the way up to people in their 80s. So we have multiple programs in that age range. At the earliest age range, our Reach Out and Read program actually happens in pediatric offices. And it's where pediatricians give a book at a well baby check and talk to the parents about importance of reading to their children and about young brain development and how critical it is that they be in a language-rich environment. So what we're seeing is a lot of those well child checkups are being canceled. In fact, there was an article I saw, I don't remember, somewhere today, that there's now concern that children aren't getting the immunizations they need because so many have been canceled. So that's an impact in that program. And then our school age program, that's, are the schools opening? Aren't they? How are they? We made the decision a couple of weeks ago that regardless of what the schools do, we don't feel it's safe to ask our volunteers to go back into the schools. So regardless what the schools do, our Reading Seed program will be switching to a virtual model in our intensive schools. in our traditional reading seed schools, we're going to pivot into a reading seed for parents. With so many parents now having to homeschool their children and being frustrated by that, we thought if we offered the same training that we offer to our reading seed coaches, somewhat modified because it's parents instead of volunteers, that we could really give some tools to parents, particularly of those early elementary school age children, that will help them be able to assist their children more with their schoolwork, and not just learning how to read, but how to instill the love of books and the love of learning. That's really what our Reading Seed program does. So that's probably the program that's having the hardest time because it is so school-based. And our other school-based program is an arts program, which is generally live theater, as Bonnie was just talking about. They have pivoted, this is our Stories That Soar program, they have totally pivoted into an online version of themselves. So when everything shut down in March, 2 magic boxes had been in elementary schools. The stories had been collected. So our performing arts team went ahead and put them together. So we still had a 50-minute show. But as Bonnie said, the actors couldn't get together to do that. So each one took a story and then individually produced it, either acted it live and often had family members helping, or they produced a video or an animation or something that actually has come together amazingly well. We're calling it Stories That Stream. And an offshoot of that we're now looking to get some legs under is to really open that up to not just children in a particular elementary school who have the magic box, but to any child in Pima County who wants to write. We're putting together a virtual portal where children can enter their stories, and then once a week they can tune in to, probably it'll be our YouTube channel, to see which story was selected and which story has been brought to life that week. So we're excited about the potential of that. And I think all of our programs have found there's pieces of this that we hope will be able to continue even after the pandemic. All of our programs before this happened had been talking about, we don't really use technology much in our programs. We should probably, we were sort of tipping our toe in the water a little bit. Then the pandemic hit, and suddenly we were in the deep end, sort of trying to come to the surface somehow. So it's exciting, really, for Stories That Soar to see that they can do a virtual piece. We heard from one of the actresses in our troupe that her nieces and nephew in Hermosillo, Mexico, even though they don't speak English, they were enjoying watching the pieces that were being put on YouTube every day, which led us to think, well, wow, virtually, this could go much broader. So that's kind of a fun potential that's come out of this. I know every one of our actors are eager, though, to get back on stage and do the productions that they're used to doing.
But you raise a good point about maybe young people and how they engage. So are you finding that younger audience is very accustomed to using the technology and to being in a virtual setting?
Well, that sort of raises the whole digital inequity question that's been true for as long as there's been this technology, but it's really raised to the surface as we have struggled with this pandemic. The children who have access to technology and to Wi-Fi, yes, they can readily engage. Same with our adult learners. We do 2 adult programs, adult basic literacy and English language acquisition for adults. And again, for those who have the technology and the Wi-Fi, but we're experiencing very similar to what the schools experienced when they shut down in March. that a very small percentage of our students actually have that access. I know Prince Elementary School, which is the one closest to the Literacy Connects building, did a survey and found that less than 20% of the students in that school had any kind of access. So, you know, one of the things that nonprofits do besides our mission work is advocacy around what are some of the root causes of why we're doing this work in the first place. So we're working at Literacy Connects, trying to reach out to other groups around town and around the state of Arizona to do some work on how can we address this digital inequity that just clearly is leaving a lot of people behind. So that's an issue and a problem that for now, we're doing what we can on the advocacy side, and we're also just somewhat resigned to, we'll reach as many students as we can virtually for now. And hopefully as time goes on, more and more people have access. I mean, one of the things we're doing is we're creating a small lending library of Chromebooks and hotspots for our adult learners. So, you know, it's going to, you know, it's a drop in the ocean, but at least it'll help some of our students.
I mean, on that note, are there some things that the community could do that would help you be successful solving some of that problem? Or, you know, how do we go about that?
Yeah, I mean, our first thought was, oh, we could ask people to donate used laptops and so forth, but the logistics of then getting them all wiped clean and, you know, it just, we don't have the capacity to really do that. It's really working with the school districts, the city and the county to see, is there a way that corporately we can make sure everybody has Wi-Fi? I don't think the devices are not the biggest stumbling block. It's the Wi-Fi. Okay. And I know, you know, Cox has done a wonderful job. You know, they have a program where for $10 a month, low-income families can get Wi-Fi. But, you know, if your income is sufficiently low and you're having to make the decision, am I going to buy milk for my kids or am I going to pay my Wi-Fi bill? You know, the milk's going to win. So it's a societal problem, but it's certainly one that has held us back from being able to reach everybody.
I wonder if we need to start a program like Adopt a Digital Kid or something, you know, in this remote learning era. But it's been on all of our minds, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's in some areas, you know, school buses or food trucks have become hotspots for that neighborhood. So I think the more we can do things like that, because, you know, you can get a basic Chromebook for like $250, $260, something like that, which is sufficient for doing basic online learning. Maybe not at the higher grade levels, but certainly for many students, it's sufficient. But it's then getting them connected to the Wi-Fi that at normal prices, it's just too expensive, you know, for us to try to supplement or to provide. So, so our adult programs have had their challenges. I mean, you know, how do you reach out and let students know that there are now English classes available online when your students speak 40 different languages? You know, so that was an obstacle, which actually we overcame through some software that we found. But it's just been that kind of constant, you know, I talk about it as building the airplane while we're flying it. Early on in this, I got an email from one of our staff. It was a short email, it was like 4 or 5 sentences. And at the very end, she said, I realize I just used the word learn 6 times. Doesn't that just summarize where we are right now? You know, we're just learning all of this stuff that we didn't know we were going to be learning so quickly. But, and my staff has done an amazing job of really learning it, testing it, piloting it, finding out what works, what doesn't work. One of our immediate learnings in our adult programs is that it actually takes more staff to teach virtually than it does in person, because for it to be effective, you've got to keep the classes really small, like 6 to 8 students per instructor. And then our staff, although our volunteers are doing most of the teaching, it takes staff to make sure that the volunteers and the students are actually connecting and that they're not having technical glitches. We've had to do crash course training for all of our volunteers on how do you teach digitally now instead of in person, because so much of the way we teach our volunteers to teach is in a very interactive way. So it's, as you were saying with theater, it's not the same virtually as it is in person, and it's very much true with education as well. It's not at all the same. But our biggest success to date probably has been in our Spanish GED classes that continue to thrive. And for a while there was, you couldn't take the GED test because nobody was taking it, but it was giving it, but that's finally opened again. So just adapting, making lots of figuring out as we go. And again, in every one of our programs, some of that virtual learning will probably continue even when finally we can go back to online. You know, recognizing that as the digital divide gets more and more solutions, we then have the ability to reach out into the areas where it's so hard to get volunteers to drive to because it's far away. But by teaching virtually, you know, we've had a couple volunteers who have either moved from Tucson or have health issues that prevent them from teaching in person. When they learned we were teaching virtually, they said, oh, wow, I can do that. You know, so there's pluses and minuses, I guess, would be the sum. Financially, we've taken a beating. A lot of that came from events that were to happen that we were to be the beneficiary of, which didn't happen. The Festival of Books was the biggest one, but there was a golf outing that we were supposed to benefit from that didn't happen, and we were going to be one of the Centurions beneficiaries, and of course that didn't happen. So a very large sum of money that was to come through benefits like that we did not get and will not be getting. And then we have some fee-for-service work that we do, also some contract work that we may be able to capture some of it, but because we're not doing in-person classes, we're certainly not going to be able to totally fulfill those contracts. So that's another loss. But, you know, to echo what both Michael and Bonnie have said, our donors have been very generous. A few foundations let us know that they would not be funding us because they were only going to fund COVID emergency relief. But many others have stepped up and said, you know, how can we help? We want to make sure Literacy Connects thrives through this, and that as many people as possible can continue to work on their literacy skills.
That's great. So there's a question, I think, which will be a good one to end with all of our panelists to share. And this is from Charlene. What is one thing that each of you has as a takeaway from the COVID situation that we should all focus on? So I guess, Betty, we'll start with you. I mean, what's that takeaway? What do you want people to know from this COVID-19 experience?
You know, I think it's something Michael said earlier, that Tucson is a community that really does care about one another. This has provided an opportunity to bring the community together, and the strength of that caring, I think it's been marvelous to be a part of, to see that, and I think that was there before COVID, and I think that's the takeaway too, that the more we are unified as a community, the stronger we are.
Fantastic. Michael, how about you?
I would say the few brain cells and energy you have beyond managing today's crises, have a small team, whoever that is, even if it's just part of your day, and others, be thinking about what's happening in 12 months. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So plan for that better future, because that's the opportunity we have. We're innovating, we're adapting, we're changing, but where is it headed? Is it just about managing a crisis, or building a better high impact business that makes a difference in the world and makes money?
Great. And Bonnie?
I think it's that all of the assumptions that we may have brought into this moment no longer apply. And that is an extraordinary opportunity. As much as it is just like almost a crippling feeling of anxiety, it also gives us the chance to build better, more just, more equitable, more sustainable systems if we come together and think about it like that it is an opportunity for groundbreaking, dramatic change to happen.
It's awesome. And I think, given that we're all learning something new, it should even be more groundbreaking, right? I mean, I think that's where, and I go back to Michael's comment about being, planning for the future and thinking about what's next. At the beginning of this crisis, we were very focused on what do we do right now and this immediate reaction. As quarantine set in, I know I started to think, what else should I be doing with this extra quarantine time that I'm not, doing those other things? And that's where I think we get back to that long-term planning and put that back into place as well, so that we're ready to go, and we're going to have some new skills to throw in with it. So I just want to thank all of you for being on the panel today. Very insightful, and it's very encouraging to hear, I think, the good attitude that each of you brings to what you're facing, which I know are challenging times. And I think our audience is saying the same. There's some nice comments in our chat box. So again, thank you, much appreciated. And I think the other opportunity here is that those that are connecting, those attendees, they get to know you. They can reach out. You're great mentors to many of our nonprofit organizations in the community with the leadership that each of you brings. So thank you for that. And I'll take us to a close by just reminding everyone that we'll be back again next week. We do these Monday at 3 p.m. And next week, we'll feature speakers from the 3 organizations that are administering our We Are One Somos Uno Resiliency Fund grant programs for small business and nonprofit continuity grants, as well as grants for individuals and families. So we'll have those organizations share with you all of the details. That will be much needed financial support for everyone at this time. And so I want to be sure we share the good news on that next week. Be sure to register when you see that email invite in your inbox. And it is our goal to keep you connected to these resources as we navigate this pandemic together. You can also call our City of Tucson Economic Initiative Small Business Hotline at 520-837-4100 and check connecttucson.com for resources, and make sure you're on our email list there. You can sign up. So I'm looking just to finish out the comments. A lot of thank yous and excellent discussion, and thank you for all you do in the community. So again, I think you're appreciated, and the work you do is appreciated. So with that, everyone have a very safe afternoon.